So I went and took a really much longer walk than I normally do, and I loved it. It was the best. Oh, before I get into the whole Mother's Day thing, I'll show you my shirt. This I bought for Shay Carl, and he wears this every now and then, but I love it. It's very comfortable, and I wore it for exercising, and I tucked it up like this so you can take a look at it, you know, and see what it says, and it's awesome. So that way you can figure out what I'm wearing, what it says. Um, the door is open so we can get a little air in here because I've been walking around in a baseball cap and my rain slicker. um, because it's gonna rain, it's gonna downpour in a few minutes because I wasn't sure if I was going to do it while I was out, so came protected. Mother's Day. As I was thinking about this, I was just thinking about more of my grandmother's stories because there are constant and repeated stories that I tell about her that just, makes me love her more and more and more and more and more and miss her more and more and more and more and more and more and more. Um, she was just an all around pretty cool woman. I love my grandma. It I didn't realize until after she died how much it affected me that she was gone. Honestly, as I'm sure you guys know, and as I've said before, I honestly was kind of shocked that she died because it never occurred to me that she would. Just because she was such a constant in my life, I just never assumed that she wouldn't be there anymore, that she was gone, and she would die. I'm like, and honestly, this is where I guess the denial would come in because I was just so used to having her there, and all my life, whether I was in a room with her or whether I was home and she was at her house, she was there. So when she was gone, it turned out to be a little bit of a shock, but then I realized that then a week later when I was at church in her honor, because I never go to church, and I knew something told me to go, it was sort of like I was given the wake up call that, you know what, Grandma's gone. And I remember sitting in the church, just sitting there, and they had, I forgot what it was in the church. There was something that reminded me of her, and boom, cry. I broke down. Um, it's hard. I'm trying not to cry now. She was an extraordinary woman. I mean, when they first got to America, mind you, she grew up out of the country. And then when she married my grandfather, they started a life in Barbados. And by then they had had a, a few kids. I believe it was 9 of their 10. The other, there's actually 9 still alive now. My eldest uncle died at childbirth, so still a baby. So no, still a baby. He didn't. So she had been raising kids all her life, and when it came to it, my grandmother and grandfather decided, you know what, we're going to try and move to America. I'm going to send you, my mother, and a couple of my uncles with my grandmother, and I'm going to have my eldest uncle, and my grandfather said my eldest uncle himself, and I believe another uncle, my second eldest, if I'm getting it wrong, I'll correct it. My second eldest uncle will stay with us with he will stay with me being my grandfather, and we'll arrange and finalize everything, and then come and meet you guys in America. So we're talking a good while that my grandmother was raising a few kids by herself in a new country, in a new house, all by herself. And she did, and she has. And she had. Again, I'm sure it was hard. I wouldn't know, honestly. I've never had a life experience like that, so I wouldn't know. She was an amazing woman. And the thing about my grandmother was, when I was little, my grandfather was always an engineer, so he was always working. He was always up in ridiculous hours in the morning, and he would get home, I'd say around, I never saw him when he got home. I always saw him when he was about to leave. And I remember when I was little, I was never much of a heavy sleeper. Everybody else in my family is a heavy sleeper. I'm not a heavy sleeper. So I was always, whenever we would visit my grandma, I was always up with her. And I remember her mornings, she would honestly get up and help and fix my grandpa's lunch and prep him for his day. And I can remember getting up quietly and moving around. She was always in the kitchen prepping coffee and his breakfast. And he would eat his lunch in this big, gigantic, I don't want to say mason. Definitely a big Pyrex bowl. And I would always remember it would be some sort of stew. And she would just pile it up, put it in there, and always put it in a paper bag. And I believe it was a paper bag with tons of paper. It's a very heavy, solidified paper bag. And he would always drink coffee out of a big coffee bin container thing. Thermos. That's it. I was trying to think of the word. And I remember, while this is going on, the grandpa's in the shower, getting ready, getting changed. And it was always very quiet, a pantomime kind of thing, where it was just, she was doing her thing, he was doing his thing, and I was always just sitting there, watching. And I just remember her going through the whole thing of just making it, prepping it, putting it to the side, preparing his stuff, and he getting ready, he's all dressed, drinking a cup of coffee. Also, while this is going on, he's eating breakfast too. As well as getting ready. I'm just sitting there. And I just remember, him putting everything in his bag, and just heading out. That was this morning, that was his prep. And I remember my grandmother just sitting there with me, eating toast and coffee, and doing that for a little while, until my mom got up shortly after. And the day basically started, dawn was coming in, it was getting lighter outside, and there was activity moving around. Because the one thing about my family, the women tended to be up before the men, for obvious reasons. Usually they were the ones who prepared the breakfast and everything. My family, in some ways, was very old-fashioned in that way. She was from the islands, so that was what the women did. Prepare breakfast and prepare food for the kids and go about, they were doing the housework, whereas the men were off working. It was a very old-fashioned, traditional way of living during that time. And shortly after she realized that, my mom was up and maybe my aunt would get up later and start preparing stuff, she would just, talk to them for a little while, talk with me, and then retire back into the room to sleep for a little bit more. So that was my grandma, and that was my mornings with her. And the thing is, I still kind of do that now. And I'm doing that with you. The only reason I go back to bed now is I don't have a very long day, and I'm not very active. I can't be. My morning exercise, I do what I do, and then I just start feeling tired. But if if I were out in the city, I'd be doing it all day, but it would hit me later that night or even later in the next day. So I'm realizing, my boundaries. Okay, I've been talking and talking and talking, but that was my mornings with my grandma. So I wanted to share that with you. Plus, wish everyone a happy, beautiful Mother's Day weekend. And mothers don't have to be female. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes just that's someone who cares and goes out of their way to take care of you. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter what, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter when. Anyway, that's my spiel for today, and that's my grandma story. So that's what I'm going to be doing every year. I'm going to tell you a grandma tale, because that's one of the best. That's the best mother I know. I knew. I love. I've loved. I will love. So you guys take care.